With your experience on observing and being involved in conflict like this, when it comes to regime change, there's often a vacuum that can get consumed and can turn into greater danger. And there's no doubt that the Ayatollah who has led Iran for since the late 1980s, being eliminated, is regime change. So, from your perspective, how do we in the West or do our Western powers ensure that regime change is done in a manner which does not create further risk, both in Iran and I'm sure with the proxies, there are many power vacuums that are occurring based off people who had a relationship with the Ayatollah. That relationship is no longer as valued.
Yeah, so I think that a couple of tips right for now, and this aligns pretty closely with what I'm seeing from the current US administration. It doesn't involve Western boots on the ground because it's not needed. You know, I was a veteran of Iraq and two tours of Afghanistan. I think we've learned by the mistakes of Gulf War II, and that's not something that the current commander-in-chief of the US military will countenance, and that's for valid reasons. The other point I would put is that it doesn't play out in the court of public opinion. The last thing the US administration would want to do is to, for example, telegraph their intentions in granular detail to news outlets such as the CNN or the British Broadcasting Corporation or even the Australian Broadcasting
From
Corporations.
a military perspective, how the United States, does Israel ensure that the power vacuums are filled correctly as opposed to more dangerously?
Yeah, so let's keep it really simple. Carrots and sticks. These are the policies that we're expecting of the interim and then subsequent um, governing apparatus in Iran. Now, the building blocks in Iran are actually far better than the building blocks in Iraq because Iran is a plural and a tolerant country with thousands of years of civilizational history. I'm glasses half full as to the prognosis of Iran. There will be a worsening in the short term. It's probable, more so than possible, that there will be additional munitions fired from Iran at targets like we've seen in the UAE and Kuwait, etc. And so that may occur for some time yet. There may be some diehards, and I'm sure that there would be, some liaison and collaboration to, establish an insurgency. I think the people that have benefited from the regime in the past will try to hold on to power, and so I'm expecting that there will need to be some support of opposition forces into an interim and then new government. That will take some time. I think it'll be months as opposed to days and weeks. Surely there will be some reprisals as well, where people that have been brutal to their neighbours under the regime, they will meet a grisly end. Think in Libya with Gaddafi. Again, that's not an indicator of what failure will look like. There will need to be you know, instability for a period in time, but stepping it back to nation state level, a carrots and sticks approach where certain policy positions will allow some of the petrochemicals and industry to be sold that will stimulate the economy. But of course, if the powers that be, that is the US and Israel, that are providing leadership in this regard, are seeing indicators and warnings that suggest that the message isn't getting through. I'm expecting a continuance of targeting, and that's similar to what we've seen up in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Hezbollah, the Radwan forces, still pose challenges to leadership and governance in Lebanon, and that's why there's been ongoing targeting from the IDF. Every time a couple of Hezbollah forces come together and say a salam and have a cup of chai, there seems to be a JDAM that, or a small drone that busts up the party. That I think will occur not only in Lebanon for some time, but also Iran. But yeah, I'm very optimistic as to what the actions in 25, 26, and potentially 2027 will mean to Iran in 20 or 30 years' time. Stepping up to the highest level, I'd like to just put on the table that former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, who I understand is going to be one of the lead contenders for this year's Israeli elections. He made the point recently that in 20 years' time, Iran and Turkey will essentially change positions, opening up the conversation to include Erdogan's Turkey. It's a far cry from Mustafa Kemal Ataturk and what that amazing secular leader of the incredible nation of Turkey has done over the last 20 years. Very optimistic about what we're likely to see in Iran. Pessimistic, unfortunately, as to what we may see in Turkey going forward. Erdogan is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and it would seem as though this NATO nation that sits atop a country of what, 80 million people between Europe and Asia, is doing in that nation.
So, with the overthrow in Venezuela, there was a vacuum that was filled very quickly with a leadership that looks to be working in alliance to an extent with the United States. In Mexico, there seems to be a willingness to work with the United States as opposed to filling those kind of topples. However, in places like Iran, and as you alluded to with what Erdogan's direction may be, and the Muslim Brotherhood, there is a religious aspect as well there that is different to just carrot and stick response. So, could you comment on what the Muslim Brotherhood actually is, and how much the religious aspect of it all it plays a different role compared to other regime shifts?
Look, Muslim Brotherhood are a Sunni terrorist organization. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, are members of the broader Muslim Brotherhood. They date back to Salafist Wahhabists, proponents of a guy called Qutb, which came out of Egypt. Really unsavory characters. And I think the reality here is that we can't reason with unreasonable people. It's quite difficult to have any dealings with jihadists, Islamists. Now, that's not saying that the 1.9 billion adherents to the Muslim religion, one of three great Abrahamic religions. Not all Muslims are Islamists, but Muslim Brotherhood is not a benign form of Islam. Muslim Brotherhood is a politically driven theocracy that's trying to establish a global caliphate. They not only provide an unacceptable safety risk to the Jewish state, Muslim Brotherhood provide an unacceptable safety risk to the secular, the benign dictator in Egypt, President El-Sisi, but also the House of Saud, which is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The biggest targets on the agenda for Muslim Brotherhood. It's not Israel, it's actually Mecca and Medina, but they also pose an existential risk to Christians and Jews in Israel, based on the fact that the Temple Mount, the Al Quds Mosque, is the third holiest site in the Muslim faith.
So I'm talking more from the aspect of the how much a carrot and the stick response can work the same way that it has in seemingly adjacent conflicts.
As it relates to Iran, I think that the average Iranian is quite a secular and tolerant and progressive people, and so I'm far more optimistic as to the prognosis of Persia, modern day Iran, than I am to modern day Anatolia, Turkey. I see that at the end of the day, the people of Iran will author their tomorrow. And as President Trump has messaged very clearly, help was on its way. Help has arrived now where they're doing the heavy lifting. But at the end of the day, it'll be the people of Iran that need to exercise their agency. Things can only go one of three ways: better, worse, or stay the same. I think that in terms of nation states, there's a carrots and sticks approach where it's in the world's best interests for a modern uh, form of government comes about in Iran. That will take time. Um, Probably years, if not tens of years, but it's infinitely better than the descent into madness that the Ayatollahs have been providing, with what I think in time will be seen as malfeasance in terms of former US administration policy towards Iran, JCPOA, Biden and Obama level policies. But look, I don't make a political perspective. I've been apolitical across the whole of my first career. But I think that we've now got the benefit of what has actually played out with Iran, with the Ayatollahs, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the President Obama signature policy, which was supported by the gang of Western European nations. I think will be looked at in a more accurate but very critical sense, has been a source of great instability
A Neville
and
Chamberlain-like moment.
profound loss of life. Yeah, I think that if that policy was in the field of medicine, there'd be a class action that the lawyers would litigate. It in my view, has been a causal factor in the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives in the Middle East and even further afield.